Good evening. We will begin momentarily. My name is Ramona Khan, and I will be your moderator for tonight's meeting. Before we begin, I have some important ground rules to share. You have been muted upon entry and will remain so unless you've been called upon to speak. The members of the Wage Board are unmuted so they can speak at any time. Any distracting video will be disabled. And please note that today's meeting is being recorded. At this time, I am pleased to welcome and introduce the board chair, Brenda McDuffie, who will now start the meeting. Madam Chair, you may begin.
Good evening, and thank you, Ms. Khan, for moderating tonight. I'd like to welcome.
You probably have to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? You can hear me, Dennis? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me, Ramona?
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, I see her searching. Ramona, can you hear me?
We can hear
you.
you.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I was unmuted the entire time. So thank you so much for moderating tonight's meeting. And I'd like to say good evening and welcome all of you to the Farm Laborers Wage Board meeting this evening. I'd also hope and pray that all of you are having a safe and joyous holiday season. As you heard, my name is Brenda McDuffie. And I would like to thank Commissioner Reardon for the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Farm Wage Board and welcome every member of the public who has taken time out of their schedule to be here with us tonight. And I recognize many names, so I also acknowledge that you have been with us throughout this process. And again, thank you. I'd like to introduce my fellow board members who really need no introduction. They've been here all along also. But we have representing the Farm Bureau, Mr. David Fisher, and representing New York State AFL-CIO, Mr. Dennis Hughes. And as you heard, you'll be hearing from the board members tonight, and those are the only lines that are unmuted. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank the members of the Department of Labor staff who've been with us also throughout the entire process, including tonight, and that's Mike Pigliano. I'm going to say it right before we are over, Mike. I say it better when we're just chatting. Mike is the Deputy Counsel for the Department of Labor, and Milan Blott, Deputy Commissioner for Worker Protection. Both of them have been providing us with information throughout this process, and we sincerely thank them for the work they've done on behalf of the board. Before we move along with our meeting, I want to remind those of you who are joining us of a few things. We are conducting simultaneously translation during this meeting, and that has caused me to slow down a little bit. So I apologize, and again, welcome our interpreters. So I would ask that all of my fellow board members try to speak slowly so we can help our translators keep up with our messaging. Today's meeting is open to the public, and it is being recorded. The recordings, as well as a lot of great information about our deliberations, is available on the Department of Labor's website. That website is labor.ny.gov. You can find more detail of our work on that website. And as a reminder, all of the testimony that we have received prior to this meeting publicly, including that testimony that was submitted in writing, closed on October 31st. And all of the members of the board have received that testimony. Transcripts of the testimony will be available soon in both English and Spanish on the Department of Labor's website. And as I said, we've all received all of that information And I thank our board members for reviewing it as they have taken these deliberations very seriously. With that, I'd like to open up today's discussion. And today we're just going to give some reflection on where we are relative to the charge that we have from the department. And I'd like to start with my fellow board member, David Fisher. And as you know, David represents the Farm Bureau. And I'd ask him to give us some brief remarks on his reflection of our deliberations and any comments he'd like to make at this time. So, David?
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for being an excellent chair and working through with us on this, through the progress of this. I don't know, I didn't look, I guess, to see if the information that was provided to us after the last one on California was shared publicly, but as I suspected, in my opinion, it didn't really show an awful lot. Hasn't really been long enough, although that law took effect in 2016. I did find one article. There is some anecdotal evidence that shows that some of the higher intensity crops are moving to Mexico and some to Canada, but I don't think we have good confirmation of that. I did find one article that I would just reference. It was the asparagus growers of California, which at one point grew 36,000 acres. And in 2020, with serious declines in the last few years, are down. Their articles stated they were down to less than 1,000 acres, which asparagus is a high intensity labor crop, and technology wasn't able to be used. So it's mostly moved to Mexico and a lot in Peru. And somebody likes asparagus, I watch that. So that's where most of that we have purchased has come from recently. I think we're in a tough time to make decisions like this with a pandemic. Last year, the national debt was at the highest level it's been at in agriculture since the 80s. Consolidation and disappearance of small farms is continuing rapidly. According to the USDA data, 2012 to 2017, we lost 18% of our dairies in New York. And we did have numerous people testify of examples of fruit trees being taken out of production and not being replanted, vegetable ground being shifted to less labor intensive row crops. An assemblywoman testified with some information from NASS that I thought was worth resharing because it kind of is counter to some of the DOL data that was shared, referencing California, Minnesota, and New York. Net farm income in California in 2017 shows was 126,000. Minnesota was 65,000, and New York was 42,000. If you relate that to farm income as a percent of median household income, farms in California were 176%. Minnesota was 96%, and New York was 64%. And if you look at in that report, net farm income expressed as an hourly wage based on 60 hours, New York farm owners were getting paid $13.74. So just having said that, I think look at the law and what it did, the workers have gained significantly. They have overtime. They have a mandatory day of rest or an option for overtime. They have the right to organize. They now have paid family leave, they have paid sick time, training on sexual harassment. All those things are significant gains for the workers, which I don't have a problem with, and most of us don't. But I think that's a huge change, and the pendulum has swung, and I know the advocates would want it to swing farther and probably faster, but I would only warn everybody, when that happens, there are often unintended consequences and sometimes serious ones. And I think that's why I've been asking right along for a pause for a few years in this, to have farmers adjust and workers and see how it goes and look at it again, because as we saw from California, there's not a lot of data. And I think we just need to be careful how fast we move and how quickly we move on things like this. Like I said earlier, we're in a pandemic. It's not a good time. It's not great in the farm community. It's probably the highest rate of food insecurity in this state we've seen in a long time. And I think all those things need to be considered. Some would say that we are like other industries, and I would again argue that we are not. You know, we operate at the corner of climate, weather, perishable products, and producers who are competing in a global market as price takers. And we are kind of at the bottom of a lot of these things and can't really affect the price. And so I think we need to look carefully as we make these decisions. There's a lot of talk about decision-making around ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And I would agree with that. But I would say on the governance side, the governance needs to look at the whole issue, not just one part of it, and try to, the best we can, look at it through everyone's eyes and make the best decision for the whole state of New York and the economies upstate and downstate, workers, food security, and all those things together. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for your thoughtful comments and reflections. Dennis, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. David, that was very articulate. And I think that your testimony really reflects a lot of what we've heard. But I want to make a couple of points here. And I want to point out exactly why we're here. We're here because the agricultural industry has really enjoyed exemptions from labor law since the I guess from the beginning, since labor law was initiated some 80 years ago. And the reason why we're here and the reason why we have a farm labor board is to try to figure out a way that workers in the agricultural industry can come up to the standards of workers in other industries. We understand from a labor point of view that there is some significant differences between farm labor in the agricultural industry and other industries. But we also understand that there's a lot of similarities. A lot of industries are hard pressed during this pandemic, particularly people in the restaurant industry, the food processing industry, and yet they're dealing with the 40-hour overtime cap. So there's a lot to consider here. When David, when you said that a moratorium on this moving forward, I think it's useful to understand that, yes, maybe we should take a look and there should be some degree of pause before we get into bringing the standards of workers in the agricultural industry to the same standards of people in other industries. But let it be said that the reason why we're here is because we want to have parity. The state of New York's policy, public policy at this point, is to establish parity between your industry, the agricultural industry, and industries throughout the state. We heard testimony of industries where there are some similarities, and there isn't any industry that is exactly the same. But there is industries that fight the same restrictions and deal with the same issues of labor fairness, and they live with it. As I said, the restaurant industry, the food processing industry deal with perishable products as well, and the people that pack the food, transport the food, process the food, cook the food, and serve the food all pay premium rates after 40 hours. And yet they're dealing with it. And all of those industries along the line are involved in a pandemic as well. And yet they're dealing with it. And we're not giving them any, any exemptions from the laws that they live with. And they build their business plans around the fact that they have to deal with these laws that have been in effect for 80 years. So I would like to say that, yes, we can come to some agreement here, David. We can come to some pause. We can figure out ways that we could move along slowly towards parity. But from our point of view, from organized labor, from labor in the state, from a public policy point of view, we have to get to that 40 hours at some point in time, whether it be down the road, years down the road, how many years, how we put it in effect, what the formula is, how, what exemptions we give now in the pandemic, all that stuff has to be worked out. But from our point of view, getting to 40 hours is what this whole commission was about. I don't think we were formed to come up with exemptions to labor law. I think we were formed as a board to come up with ways to deal with fair ways to deal with wage and hour law enforcement for farm workers in a way that it meets the parity of all workers in this state. So we understand that you are in a bind at this particular point, but our goal, really, the goal should be, now that you've enjoyed 80 years of exemptions from these laws, we have to figure out a way to phase you into a parity with other workers in the state.
I think it's more of it would be easier if it was a national issue, Dennis, if it was taken care of nationally, because that would keep us on an evener playing field with the rest. And I understand where you're coming from. And with this, and that's one of the reasons I say we need to pause, is we need to figure out, as you said, they've made business plans with overtime. We've never had to deal with it, and now we are. So it's a change. And when there's changes, I think that's my point, is just we need to go slow and take some time and give people a chance to adjust and work on their business plan and how it might be affected. Or if they can't see that it could work, then they need to do something else. And if that's where it's going.
No, a pause is reasonable.
Yeah.
To have a pause before we start to get towards that 40-hour mark is a reasonable request. And now I can understand now there's difficulties moving forward, and I could understand that you need time to figure out. The industry needs time to figure this out, and that's a reasonable request. But I want to say, though, that the goal should be, and as I read public policy in the state, the goal should be to get to parity at some stage. And, to give people time to figure it out. But, keep in mind that parity, at least from our point of view, parity is a very important part of this. Again, 80 years of this, and it's very hard to justify not having a class of workers not coming under any particular wage and hour protections.
Yeah.
And yeah, the
Thank you.
pendulum is swinging, and it has. If we end up there, then one of the issues is the mandatory on the 7th day, which is not on our table, but that's problematic because I can tell you farmers have told me that there's workers that have only worked less than 40 hours and they've gotten several hours of overtime in a week, which is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, there's all those things have to be, we could look at how that goes down. We could look to other industries that deal with issues like that. But, let's keep in mind that what we're talking about here is fairness and parity between the agricultural industry and every other industry throughout the state.
Yeah.
As long as the industry can support that in some way, or if not, then if the people of New York are comfortable importing all their food from Mexico, Peru, or wherever, which may well happen.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons to every answer.
There is cons to everything, yes.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing out, and I thank both of you for your dialogue and your thoughts, because as we began this process, clearly we understand the importance of and the implications of the decisions this board was charged to make relative to changing, lowering, in particular, the 60-hour provision before overtime is paid. And throughout this process, I think one of the things that we've been very fortunate in doing is allowing variety of individuals from various sectors to inform us and to listen to their voices. And I'm always uplifted when we take advantage of that. So again, I want to thank all of the individuals who were able to speak during this entire process, whether it was verbally or written words or telephone calls, because people using their voices in I was particularly moved because we did hear from a large number of farmers, and we did hear from some of the workers, and we heard through workers through advocacy groups many times. But I was struck particularly in this season of a national and international pandemic that we're going through, and understanding the health and welfare of people and their quality of life by the testimony that was given by two physicians that spoke about the impact of very, very long and very, very hard working periods of time on a person's body, on their physical well-being. I also was struck because it also speaks to many of the things that affect them as they mature in age, the long-term impact of working extensive, long hours. And they're doing it, as we all do in our various occupations, to support themselves and their families. And I do believe that we, as a board, as I listen to you, both Dennis and David, you recognize that we need to, as a board, look at some period of time, maybe that we can take that time to move into a process where we offer these workers what they should be entitled to, which is a quality of life, being valued as workers, and being paid for the work that they put in. I think this particular decision is even more complicated as we look across not only our state, but our country at one of the most pervasive issues during this entire crisis, which is the ability of people to be able to put food on the table or be able to eat. And certainly this industry is the major provider, and all of the sectors that are directly associated with agriculture are the most dramatically impacted by the virus, namely, the restaurant industry, um, the travel and tourism industry, that all benefit from the fact that people are eating. I think the only sector that's really doing well is really the retail stores, and even during certain seasons, they have had difficulty getting product, particularly within our state. So at this point in time, I really am hopeful that as a board, that we continue to deliberate, that we understand, and it sounds like we understand each other's position. We know that there are significant implications to individuals as well as to the economy, and the individuals who provide the farm products that we rely on as a state and as a community, as well as the competitive factors uh, that neighboring states may not necessarily face, that we would in New York State. But I think at the heart of our decision making should be the quality of life that we offer in New York State as a leader in a nation for so many things, that will allow individuals to be compensated fairly for the work that they do, and that they would enjoy a quality of life not only relative to their health and well-being, but a quality of life with time with their family, time to have time for rest and refreshment. And so with all of that in consideration, I'm really hopeful that we can move towards some of the actions that we need to take as a board to get to a place that we will have a recommendation that allows us to move forward in a way. One of the things I read about, and as you said, David, there's not a lot of good information on it, but some sort of staggering of the timing on getting to the place that we want to get to in terms of the number of hours that a person works before the overtime rules go into effect. And so with that, I certainly would be interested in hearing any more feedback and dialogue. I know we have another meeting scheduled tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and with us hearing each other's perspective, I'm hopeful that we can continue to move along in the process and figure out those right times and those right places.
I don't disagree in a perfect world, Brenda, but it's not a perfect world, and it's pretty hard to make decisions like lowering to 40 when, if it puts farmers out of business or other things, thousands of workers that come here from other countries, that this is what provides them a standard of living and a way to raise their family and be successful, and take wealth back to those other countries. It makes a huge difference to them. And if they don't come here, they're probably going to, in some places where there's land, grow those crops down there. They get paid as much down there in a week as we pay them in an hour. So what do we really gain by not carefully assessing the situation? And if that puts our farmers out of business up here, thousands and thousands of people are worse off than they would be in those communities. And it does a lot for those developing countries to export their labor, so they have money, brings wealth back, so they have a chance to start businesses in their local economies. And I think there's a lot to it that we sometimes don't look at.
And I think that's why it's important that we continue, as you have done, beyond the reading that we have, taking a look at some of the other research that has been done relative to the issue, because people will have a choice as to, whether they come here or go other places. And that's been throughout the history of farming, particularly with migrant workers. They travel to different places and they make a choice as to which places they go and what resources. But at the heart of it, and where I weigh in, is the quality of life we give to people, and that we provide each individual with their value and demonstrate that we value their work through how they're paid.
I just
Dennis,
like,
I know you were going to make a comment.
I just like to say, David, on this, and there's traditionally over the years in different industries, all industries, there's been ways to protect those industries using tariffs or other protections and favored nations, so to speak, where you favor goods produced in a certain locality and so forth, but never in all those schemes to put together protections to protect an industry and to keep an industry from going extinct. Never has there been an effort to lower wages or exempt workers from protections as they protected the industry. There's many ways to protect an industry. A lot of, I think in New York State, very few of those ideas have actually been met. There's maybe things that we could do to protect the farm industry here in New York that we haven't approached. But in other situations, in other industries, in manufacturing, and every other industry, those industries have never been asked to take away rights from the people that work in those industries or deny rights to people that work in those industries. So, I understand your point. Maybe we should be protecting our farmers in other ways, but not particularly by exempting their workers from wage and hour laws.
And that's fine. I don't disagree, Dennis. I testified in front of USTR this summer because the Canadians were subsidizing and dumping stuff in our market in Hunts Point and other places and making it impossible to compete. So it is a bigger discussion, but I guess we can't, if we can't afford it, we can't afford it. So we either need a national plan or a shift in some things on the national level before I could agree to anything that was going to put farmers out of business. And I think that was why I was on this, was to represent the farm side, and that's what I'm going to try to do.
And you're doing a good
Yeah.
job. I have to say, you're doing a very good job of it. But again, what we're talking about here is trying to get to a compromise where, to the best of all our abilities, the farm industry, the agricultural industry, has time to adjust to what the wage and hour requirements of every other industry in the state are required to do. We're talking about time. We're talking about an understanding, and we're talking about realizing that, yes, it's been 80 years without any of these things. So of course you need time to get up to speed. We understand that.
Yeah, I think that we all recognize the importance of this industry and the importance of its contribution to the economy and well-being of the state of New York, and want to do everything we can. It sounds like there may be even an opportunity to join forces to do some of the things, at least in New York State, and having it lead the country in protecting our farms in general. And so I think we can all agree to that point.
I'm surprised that over the years, there hasn't been an effort
Mhm.
to protect, the agricultural industry in the state
Mhm.
to a larger degree, to a more expansive degree. I'm really surprised with that. we've seen it in other ways. I'm surprised that there's never been that protection. But I guess the protection was to exempt them from wage and hour laws.
The grocers buy where they can buy cheap. And when three major grocery chains in the country control north of 70% of the food supply, they don't care where they get it as long as it's cheap. And they bargain tough, and prices are the same or less than they've been 30 years ago in general. So unless there's a shift in something, I'm just saying, what we can afford in a lot of situations.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
And other industries are going through the same, on that end of it, going through the same thing as well.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments? Okay, well, I would like to conclude this meeting for this evening. And I remind everyone that the materials related to today's meeting will be posted on the Department of Labor's website. And that website is labor.ny.gov. And I'd like to thank everyone for their participation this evening, for continuing to listen, understand, and I hope move more towards an outcome that will allow us as a state to move forward in terms of keeping farms and agricultural industry strong within our state, while at the same time making sure people have all of the protections and the compensation that other workers have, as we're charged to do as part of this board's work. We do have another hearing scheduled for tomorrow evening at 4. I would remind you to please check the website because unfortunately sometimes we have to make changes. And we just posted another hearing very close to our deadline of December 31st at 4 o'clock also. We have another opportunity to meet. So again, I ask you to please stay safe. Please continue to enjoy this holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. And again, thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much.
And in particular, Dennis and David, I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.